we really know two reasons for LagBaomer. One of the reasons of LagBaomer, celebrating LagBaomer, is because the 24,000 students of Rebbe Akiva passed away. And on LagBaomer, they stopped passing away. So because of the fact that they didn't pass away on LagBaomer, became a day of celebration. Very sad time. The reason why did the students of Rebbe Akiva pass away? So the Talmud says they passed away because they did not have respect for each other. They didn't have respect for each other. And that was the, so to speak, the sin that caused them to pass away. It's a very terrible tragedy, 24,000 students. It's a huge, huge tragedy, like a pandemic. They all passed away, and because they didn't have enough respect for each other. And the other reason for LagBaomer is that it's the day of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. It's Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's special day, which is called the Hilula, almost like a wedding, day of rejoicing. And
what is his name again?
Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai.
Okay, thank
Rabbi
you.
Shimon Bar Yochai, this is his special day. And the reason why it's his special day is actually because, surprisingly enough, it's the day that he passed away. But his passing away was a sign that he reached the highest levels. On this day, he revealed some of the highest levels of the hidden secrets of the Torah. And he went up in a fire to heaven. He was the greatest of the great and holiest of the holy. And he passed away on this day. And he said that he wants everyone to rejoice on this special day. And so in following with his request, we make parades and we celebrate, make a fire. And it is interesting to note that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was actually a student of Rabbi Akiva. After Rabbi Akiva's 24,000 students passed away, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was a student of Rabbi Akiva's the later students. And it says that Rabbi Akiva had 5 students afterwards, and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was one of them. So these are the two reasons for celebration. Yes, Robert.
So what is the significance of having the bonfires? What does that really mean then?
The bonfire, I believe, is connected to the fact that he went up in a fire, or a fire surrounded him, and when he was teaching, there was, or he went up in a fire to heaven. There's very interesting stories of his last of that day. What he would, he was with his students, and they were, some of them couldn't handle the light. He had it was a tremendous fiery light coming from him, and they couldn't handle it. So most of them had to go outside the house where he was in, and only 2 of them were with him. And then ultimately his soul, went up to heaven. And I think he was in the middle of saying the word Chaim, and life, which means life, and he went up to heaven. And with it was a great, so to speak, tremendous revelation of spiritual death. Yes, Ben.
Rabbi, yesterday the Rabbi also said that Bar Yochai and his son burned their clothes before they went into the me'ara. And that's why people they throw clothes into the bonfire. So maybe that's part of the bonfire story too.
They burn their clothes?
Yeah, and they burn themselves in sand. So
they buried themselves.
The clothes were gonna go.
They didn't burn their clothes. They buried themselves in sand. Yes, they buried themselves in the sand.
But that's what I understood yesterday.
Yeah, I don't know about that.
I don't remember that part.
Yeah. They buried themselves in the sand. That's correct. But in any event, I wanted to, I just wanted to share with you a little insight into the story of LagBaomer before we have our Gemara class. So the question is, how is it possible that, or why is it that they all passed away at this one time? Do they all of a sudden become not respectful to each other? It would seem that it took a long time till they reached this, it would seem that, it wasn't automatic. It wasn't like a one spontaneous moment. They stopped having respect for each other. So why did they all pass away at this time when he had his 24,000 students? It would seem like it took many years till he added up to that amount of students. Everything takes time. It didn't just happen that he had 24,000 students in one shot. They all just entered his study hall, and all of a sudden they didn't have respect for each other, and so they all passed away. It would seem like it was over many years that it took to get that amount of students, and the disrespect that they probably had for each other should have probably been there for many years. So they should have, if this was such a sin that it deserves a punishment, it should have affected them over many years, not just during this, not just in this Perek Echad, at this one moment, this one time. They all died between Pesach and Shavuos. So what happened that caused this, disrespect for each other and caused this punishment that happened at one time? So in order to understand this, we also have to understand there's another question, and that is Rabbi Akiva taught about v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, loving your neighbor as yourself. This is the great lesson in the Torah. And if Avos Yisrael is such an important thing, and Rabbi Akiva was like the master of this lesson, he was the teacher of how important Avos Yisrael is, loving your neighbor as yourself. So how could it be that his students did not have respect for each other? If they're the ones who are supposed to be promoting it, it's supposed to be the source of this is Rabbi Akiva. So on a simple level, you could say maybe this is what Rabbi Akiva taught after they all passed away. That would be a very simple way of explaining it, that maybe they all passed away. And Rabbi Akiva said from then on, he taught about this v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha as a sort of lesson that he learned from this tragedy that happened to his students. But that's not necessarily the explanation, because it would make sense to say that Rabbi Akiva, this was his teaching that he taught all along. This was something that a major part of his tradition of his teaching that he taught his students was v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, that not just he came up with it later on in his years, but it would seem like this was one of his major mottos in life, is v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, loving your neighbor as yourself, was a major part of his teaching. And therefore, it would make sense to say that in order to answer this question, how is it that his students had no respect, and yet he was the one who taught respect, how valuable and important, significant it is. And so in order to answer this question, one of the explanations is that specifically because they cared about each other so much, that's why they couldn't have respect for each other.
What?
In other words, it was specifically because of this that caused them not to have respect for each other. What does that mean? That because they cared so much for each other, they wanted each other to understand the teachings of Rabbi Akiva so perfectly. And if they had one view and their friend had a different view, they tried to convince their friend that their view was right. And they wanted, and when their friends didn't accept their opinion, they couldn't have respect for them. They were not able to have respect for them because they were so convinced that their explanation was right. And they had such avas Yisrael. They loved their neighbor so much. They cared so much that their friend should understand it and have the depth of understanding like they understood. And if their friend didn't accept it, they could not respect him. And that, of course, was a major mistake. And that's not, it's not necessary to go that far when your friend doesn't accept your, you don't need to have Ahavas Yisrael to the extent that you don't respect him because he's not accepting your understanding and the teachings of your Rebbe's words.
Is this a case of familiarity breeds contempt?
Well, I would say caring caring too much could lead to, that it's almost like if you hug someone too hard, God forbid they could break you could break their arm. If you hug them, break their break a rib.
Crack their rib.
Break their rib. So you have two, you're caring so much.
Teaching them not to care so much. That's what this whole thing is about?
Their mistake was that they were so convinced that their explanation of understanding their teacher, Rabbi Akiva's teaching.
So it was their ego.
Right.
It was their ego.
Connected to ego, of course, right? It's connected to ego, and it was a feeling of confidence that they are, an ego that they're right and their friend is wrong and their friend's explanation is wrong, but they almost like forced it on their friend. They felt that their friend was, needed to see things their way, and that was taking it too far. Now, the question
Rabbi,
is, yes.
I was going to say it's almost like there's a mitzvah to not put a stumbling block in front of the blind. So they might have felt that the way they understand it is the truth. And if they allow their friend to understand it in a false way, it's like putting a stumbling block in front of a blind person. So it's not necessarily their ego that drove them. Their care was out of bounds for the other person, to the point that they don't want this person to make a mistake by misunderstanding the teaching.
Right, but it's like an intolerance of somebody else's opinion or interpretation.
Right. Well, David's adding another dimension, which is nice. I still think the ego is somewhat there, because the fact that they were so convinced that their explanation was right and their friend is wrong has some level of ego. But I think your point is also very valid, David, and that is that they felt that they have to protest against their friend who's understanding it wrong. And they felt if they don't, protest and show that their friend is and teach him that it's wrong, they're almost like agreeing to his wrong view. And so they felt obligated to not allow this stumbling block to their friend. They felt obligated to remove that stumbling block, the wrong interpretation that their friend has, so that they would almost like making a protest against their friend's wrong view. Yes, Robert.
I guess, I don't know if this is a Jewish source or not, but there's an adage, others above self. And so then you respect others for even though you differ from them, they have their understanding. So others above self. I don't know how it's interpreted within Jewish, tradition or whatever, but that I know within the society we live in today.
Interesting. Okay, yeah. So it's there is it's talked about in the realm of I guess psychology. Yeah. Yes, Ben. Ben. We can't hear you. You're muted.
I heard that because Rabbi Akiva was putting so much emphasis on that point, and they were at a higher level than most people, then they did not come up to the level they were supposed to. They were nice to each other, but I guess not enough for where they were at.
So that is so true.
And that's why they were punished.
Thank you for mentioning that. That's so correct. That now the question is, so fine. So they didn't have they couldn't handle that their friend had the wrong view. But is that a reason why they would, really like embarrass their friend, or treat them really really bad? And so the explanation is, like Ben just said, that obviously they weren't totally embarrassing. What was the word?
Kosher, that they weren't kosher.
Yeah. No, but they were degrading their friend and really making them, obviously they weren't, really embarrassing and harassing their
Up to
friend.
the level.
But because of the level that they were on, the little zilzal, the little embarrassment, the little disparaging that they had towards their friend, their disrespect towards their friends, on their level was considered a terrible sin. Again, on their level, we would have expected more. But obviously they weren't totally disregarding their friends, completely, and dishonoring them and embarrassing them and so on. But on their level, we expected them to have a higher respect for their friends, and they didn't. Now, the question is, so is this a reason that they should all die? Is that a reason for them to pass away? So what's interesting is that it uses the term kulan mesu beperek echad. They all died in one time. There's another Talmudic statement that uses the same thing, that it says in Talmud Yerushalmi, kulan mesu beperek echad. They all died at one time. It mentions this when there were 24 caravans that went, or wagons that came to the city of Lud in Israel, and it talks about how they went there in order to be Makadish, to testify about the moon, and because in Jewish law, in order to set the new month, they needed to witness, they needed to see if the moon appeared. And that would tell them if the previous month was a 29-day month or a 30-day month, because if the moon appeared on the 30th, on the night of the 30th, then that would mean that the previous month was a 29-day month. And if the moon did not appear, then it would just be a 30-day month. And so they went to Lud to testify, and it says, this is in the tractate Yerushalmi, it says this story, and that they all died. Some ayin hara, an evil eye, affected them, it says, and they all died at one time. And so what this means is that the number 24 is connected to, there were, again, we'll look at these two stories. We have the story of Rebbe Akiva students, 24,000 students, and we have the story of the 24 wagons that in the Talmud Yerushalmi, about them traveling, and they all died from ayin hara. And we also know there's another 24, and that is that, and brought down in the Zohar, that there's 24 batei dinim, 24 courts. So we see these numbers, that there's 24 is connected to the concept of justice, midas hadin, severity and strictness. That's the number 24. And we also see 24 is connected to ayin hara, because here they died, it says, because of ayin ra, ayin hara. They died from the evil eye. Somehow there was some issue of ayin hara. There were so many, in other words, 24 wagons is a very large amount for that purpose, to go and testify. And so this 24 wagon from the house of Rebbe, the Beis Medrash of Rebbe, that they went to Lud to testify, this was considered a huge amount, and it caused an ayin hara. That's the term the Gemara uses, ayin hara, ayin ra. And so we see 24 is connected to ayin hara. So if we connect all these three Gemaras together, what comes out is that the students of Rebbe Akiva passed away because they didn't have respect for each other, but that is in connection together with the fact that it also was a a number of ayin hara in midas hadin, and it's a number that causes God to be more strict. So in other words, even though their sin maybe was not of that level, but it was it created, there were two causes for this to be considered so strict. Number one is on their level of Rabbi Akiva students, they should have had more respect for each other. And at the same time, they also had an ayin hara affect them. And together with especially because there was such a large number of students, 24,000, and this together caused that they would have such a terrible ending. Yes, David.
The number of students that the children that Mordechai gathered together on behalf of Esther and the Jewish people, was that 24,000 also?
You know what? I'd have to take a look.
My son is saying in the background here, he thinks it's 22,000.
Rabbi,
Um, $22,000. Yeah, that's what. Well, Mordechai. No, I see two sources. One says, let me see if there's any. Yeah, it seems 22,000. I see it in a few places, 22,000. So different number. I guess.
Rabbi,
I guess it was good that it wasn't 24,000. But on the other hand, I don't know if you could say that, because obviously the more the better. Just when you have that number, you have to be more careful. You know, when you have such a large number, you have to be more careful for ayin hara. So of course, the more the better. But you know, the more you have, the more you have to be you have to be careful that it doesn't cause any evil eye, doesn't cause jealousy and so on. Yes, Ben.
if I'm not wrong, I think that because of Chet Egel, also 24,000 people died.
No, I think there is a case of 24,000. I think it mentions by the Zimri with the Benois Mayav, the Benois Midian and Mayav, when they sinned with the daughters of Moab. I think over there it says 24,000.
Oh,
I think that's what you're thinking of. But anyway, I'm not gonna take the time
okay.
to look it up now. But if you want, you're welcome to do the research. We could look up all 24s in the Torah and in the Talmud. But so if anyone wants to do that for homework, that would be great. It'd be interesting to look up. But I want to connect the story of Rabbi Akiva with the story of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Ezra, did you want to say something, Ezra?
I think Moshe said in Moshe's situation with Chet Egel was 3,000.
Yeah. But by the Benos Moab.
No, I
want to look that up. That would be interesting in Parshas Balak. The end of Parshas Balak, the last few verses there. Okay, so the connect. So this is the beauty of this insight is now to connect this with the passing of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and the special holiday of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the Hilula, which is like a wedding of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. That the story that they didn't have respect for each other, loinagu kavod ze lazeh, which obviously teaches us how important it is to respect each other and to have to be careful of others' honor. But this connects us with the story of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, because Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, it says when he left the cave, he had been hiding in a cave for 13 years, and when he left the cave, of course, he was so excited to leave and happy to, not to be stuck in this cave. And he had reached great heights in his scholarliness. Him and his son studied for the last 13 years with no disruptions. What he left, he asked the community, he says, is there anything I could do for the community? He wanted to do some mitzvah for the community, to help out the community, a community service, they told him that, you know what? There's an area that the Kohanim are not allowed to walk on because there might be graves in that area. And so the Kohanim, the priests, they're not allowed to walk on graves. They have to walk around this area. And Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai said, no problem, I'll clear that area and make it so that the Kohanim would be able to walk there. And what we see from this is the high level of Ahavas Yisrael, his caring for his fellow, that number one, it's only a small part of the people, only the Kohanim. And even the Kohanim, they could walk around it. So it wasn't such a necessity, and yet he went above and beyond to go and help out the community, to help out others. So this is something that this powerful story shows us that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who probably would have loved to just teach Torah that he just accomplished, he just learned for 13 years and he reached such a high level of Torah, he probably would have loved to just go and teach Torah to people, but instead he wanted to show the care for people, all people, anyone, and to help them in any way possible, that he cared and to help these Kohanim and allow them to have a little more comfort. And this level of this Ahavas Yisrael that he accomplished, that he fulfilled, it was in a certain sense a kapara, an atonement, a tikkun for the sin of the 24,000 students of Rebbe Akiva that passed away. So this is the insight, that the connection between the two stories of LagBaomer. On the one hand, it's the day of the passing of the 24,000. It's the day where we finished we had rest from the 24,000. We stopped, the 24,000 students, didn't pass away on this day of LagBaomer, and also we have the story of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, that this is his special day because he really atoned for the sin of the 24,000 students by him correcting it, by him showing his care for the Kohanim. In addition to the fact that he also said another line, he said, I could exempt the entire world from judgment, which means that he would like everyone to go free. He would have liked even people who deserve judgment against them. He wanted to give he wanted to let everyone go free from any judgment of heaven, because he cared so much for every Yid, and not only high-level Jews, but even people who had a din against them, had a judgment against them, he would like from heaven, he would like to pater them, exempt them from their judgment. And so what we see here is that Rabbi Akiva's student, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, he atoned reached such a high level of Ahavas Yisrael as to atone for the sins of the 24,000 students. And it says that Rabbi Shimon is someone we can rely upon whenever we're in need. And what that means is, in this time of galus, in this time of exile, that came from sinas chinam, baseless hatred, we can rely on Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai that he'll exempt us from the din, from this judgment, and bring force the heavens to allow Mashiach to come immediately, and we will be able to have the Shechina will not be in galus anymore. God's presence will not be in exile. The Jewish people won't be in exile. We'll have the redemption speedily in our days through Mashiach immediately. And this is a beautiful insight from the Lubavitcher Rebbe about LagBaomer. So,
Rebbe,
yes.
what is the purpose of the barbecue and the fire? The the bonfire and all these other things that are tied in with the LagBaomer.
Yeah, so Robert had asked that question a little earlier.
I say.
I mentioned that that I believe it's connected to the fact that there was a big fire that surrounded Rashbi when he went up to heaven.
I say. Thank you.
Or the great light that came from Rashbi. One of those, I have to look up the stories. There's numerous stories about the day that he passed away and his students were surrounding him, but then they couldn't handle the light and they went outside. It's beautiful stories about Reb Shimon Bar Yochai's the holiness, his holiness and his greatness. Okay, we're going to go to the Gemara. We're on page 19a of Brochos. And we had learned on Wednesday. We learned on Wednesday about the different stories here of how they were able to find out information from people who had passed away. So we had a story of Zeiri. He had put given money to his hostess, and she had passed away. And but he was able to get information that where the money was. And the question was, how did the hostess, how was she able to, she mentioned that and tell my mother that she's going to be visited. How did she know that her mother is going to be coming and passing away shortly thereafter? And so the Gemara said, in other words, she was going to come the next morning she was going to come the next day she was going to pass away the next day. So the question is, how did she know that she's going to pass away? So the Gemara answered, Duma. Duma was the angel who announces who's coming. So maybe Duma announced it. That's how she knew. That was one Gemara. Yes, Robert.
I just was curious because the name of the angel Duma arrives, appears in at least two or more of these discussions. Does that angel have a special role within the array of angels that then is the messenger between the dead or anything like that? Is there any kind of I don't want to say a hierarchy, but any kind of a constellation of which angel does what on behalf of Hashem or as a messenger, as a shaliach or anything like that?
The only thing, I did look it up at some point about Duma. And if I remember correctly, there was an argument in the Zohar. Maybe I'm wrong, but if I remember correctly, there's an argument in the Zohar if Duma was in charge of the angels in Gehenna, in hell, or in charge of all the deceased. So I think that is
that thought somewhere about that angel's role.
But his role is involved the dead. I just don't know if that was what I saw. I saw some argument, and I think it was from the Zohar.
Are angels defined by gender or just by manifestations of being an angel?
Gender meaning male and female?
Yeah.
No, there's no male.
Okay,
female.
so identified as the angel Duma, period.
Right.
That would be
exactly. Okay, so that was one story of Zeiri. Then we had the story of Avuha de Shmuel, that people, the father of Shmuel, people used to give him money from the orphans' money, used to watch, and then he passed away. And his son, they were saying that he's not returning the money, but he didn't know where the money was. And so they were saying he's Ochel Zuzi Diasmi. He's Bar Ochel, a person who's eating the money of the orphans. So anyway, he was able to reach his father, and also we found that his father was crying because he was laughing and crying, and the reason he was crying was because Shmuel was going to pass away soon thereafter. And the Gemara says, how did he know? So on that it says that it's possible that since he's respected, Kivan de Choshev, since he's honorable and respectable, So they're going to announce to make place for Shmuel. So that's how he knew that his son, the great Shmuel, was going to pass away soon. And then the Gemara says that Rabbi Yonasan changed his mind. And even though initially he said the dead don't know anything, but then he changed his mind because of the story of Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, that Moshe is going to tell them that the promise that I promised, that Hashem's promise took place. And if they, and the Gemara says, if they don't know anything, if they don't know things, what does it help to tell them? If they aren't familiar with what's going on in the world, what does it help to tell them this? And if they're oblivious to what's going on in the world, what does it help to tell them? So the Gemara says, so what do you mean? So they know what's going on in the world? So then if they know what's going on in the world, then why do you need to tell them? And the Gemara answers that it's only because of if Moshe tells them that he was leading the Jewish people and they're just about to enter Eretz Yisrael, so he led them right up there. So Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov will then have give a certain appreciation and thanks to Moshe Rabbeinu, and that's why he would tell them. But really, they know everything that's going on in the world. So that seems to be the conclusion of the Gemara, at least here, that the dead seem to know and see what's going on in the world. Okay, we're going to continue with the next Gemara.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
This was something that was said yesterday. Rabbi Pinson basically said that after 50 years, the neshama really has no. Basically, the neshama no longer has connection with this particular world, which sort of goes against what you just stated, namely that Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov, who passed away over several hundred years before this entire episode with Moshe. So, I mean, what, how does one reconcile this contradiction?
So I wonder if he meant they don't have a connection to their body, but not that they don't have a connection to this world. I think maybe that's what he meant. That after 50 years, they're not connected they're not specifically connected to their body.
Yeah, that I know he said
That's
specifically.
correct.
What did he say?
That's
He
a
said
thought.
specifically after 50 years, you have no connection to your body. That I remember him saying.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
maybe that's what he meant. That's what he said. I don't know. Again, I'm not a Kabbalist, so I can't. If he said, there's obviously some truth to what he said. So yeah, so that's probably the only other thought that I could differentiate is if we're dealing with people that in their lifetime they cared for others, like this point that I mentioned on Wednesday from Rabbi Yonasan Eibschitz, that those that cared about others in their lifetime, so they stay with a connection to the world, and the ones that don't, they don't stay with a connection to the world. So maybe something along those lines you could maybe say about the difference between 50 years and beyond 50 years. But just a thought, that's possible. Okay, we're going to start on 3 lines down from the top on page Yud Tes Amud Aleph 19a. Amar Reb
Rabbi,
Yitzchak. Yes.
I'm sorry, I got another question. We're forbidden to communicate with the dead, but to communicate with this person who passed away in order to find out where the orphan's money was, that's okay. So how is that? I'm not saying it should be a prohibition. It's obviously not. But how is there's like a fine line between trying to find out valuable information about where the orphan's money is and just trying to communicate with the dead, which we're not supposed to be doing on a regular basis. That's what we're trying to ask.
Not only on a regular basis, never.
Never, right. Okay. So how did they find out where the orphan's money was and not violate this commandment?
Yeah, it's a very, very good question. Anyone
Rabbi-
else think of this question?
Rabbi, either you or someone else had mentioned the fact that as long as you don't use the prohibited methods that are discussed in the Torah, there's nothing that would be prohibited in asking. In other words, you can't go to a necromancer or someone who reads bones or someone who who has seances or things like that. But why can't you pray for a response or an answer of some kind?
So yeah, I'm not exactly sure how how it's done when they do these type of black magic, getting information from the dead. But
Seances.
what is that?
At all.
What did you say, Ben?
Seance, they call it.
Seance, a seance.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, but
Seance.
a seance is not one of the ways.
Yeah, you know, a
But-
voyeur tells you he or she's communicating with the dead.
Uh-huh. But
But I wanted to add something else, Rabbi, if I can for a second.
yeah,
The Shmuel went to the Shmuel, in both cases, Shmuel and the other one went to the Bet HaKvarot. Sounds like immediately, within days of the death. And at that time, the neshama is still in the Bet HaKvarot, around the body. So maybe that is allowed to go to the Bet HaKvarot at that time and talk to your family or to the important
I don't think
people
so.
in your
I
life.
don't think you're allowed to be Deiresh al HaMesim anytime. When someone
Not-
dies,
but-
you can't
But
be
not
Doresh.
later.
No. It's a prohibition in the Torah to be Doresh al HaMetim, to go to the dead. The Doresh al HaMesim would apply always. There's no, you can't start differentiating. This is a prohibition of doing these type of magical ways of doing things. But obviously here we're dealing with great righteous people that had the ability to see things or to understand things. And for example, going to a tzaddik's kever, and we know that tzaddikim talk to each other at the kever. Like the Rebbe used to go to the previous Rebbe's grave, and obviously, he was able to see things there, and so this is the same, this
Right.
idea. But it's not called Doresh al HaMesim, doing any, improper way of bringing up, doing some magical way of bringing up the dead with putting a bone in, under one's underarm and doing things like that. Yes.
Well, when you go to the Rebbe's kever,
Yeah.
in Crown Heights, you write a note and you put it in his kever. I mean, isn't that correct? I mean, what's the difference between that and bones or anything else? I mean,
Again, you're not bringing his soul, from the dead, bringing it down from heaven. You are putting something there, and he sees it. But there's a Doresh al HaMesim, which is done as Ezra mentioned, that it's it has to do with the way it's done in the idol worship way of doing it is prohibited. If it's just done as a prayer, you're asking from the tzaddik, and he just appears, somehow he appears to you. That's a different story. You're not bringing the dead back to life. You are bringing them down from heaven. You are putting in a request, and they are appearing to you and talking to you. That's up to them if they want to do that. You're not like forcing them, so to speak. I think that would be, if you want to go dig a little deeper into it, Doresh al HaMesim is when you take someone out of their comfort zone and you sort of you bring their soul here, and it wasn't something they would have wanted. You sort of forced it, and to go and daven in someone's kever, and if you're on the level of them, you're on such a high level that they want to come, and they'll come and speak to you. That's up to them if they want to come and speak to you, but you're not forcing their soul to come down here to earth against their will, against their wishes. And that would be like a way of idol worship, of forcing it, of going, because idol worship, the idea of the Kayach HaTumah is sort of like forcing blessing or benevolence to come your way against the plan, the way the world is planned. You're forcing it. So that would be my my understanding of why, of how it works with Derish El Hamisim. So does that answer your question, David?
Yes.
Okay.
Could I ask a question?
Yeah.
Okay. Sometimes if I'm unsure about what the right thing is to do, I ask Hashem, what should I do? Help me make a good decision. Or I'll ask maybe my dad or my mom who have already passed, what would you do? Sometimes I'll have a dream.
Uh-huh.
And they appear in the dream. I'm
Again,
not forcing.
You're not forcing anything, and you're not using the methods of black magic, of these type of methods to.
I don't
to
even
bring the
believe in
soul.
black magic. I'm sorry.
Right.
But I don't. Am I doing the wrong thing?
No, it's fine. It's fine, and you can go to their gravesite and ask for things. You're allowed to do that, and that's fine. And that's a very special thing to do. That's fine.
But I stand outside my mother's grave. I don't go inside where she's buried. Because there's a wall and there's a lot of graves, and it's difficult to walk there because there's so many graves. And I always just go on the outside of the wall because she's buried right on the wall. At the time that she's buried, I had no idea how significant it was that she could be right there. I mean, It's so easy for me.
Okay, in any event, that it sounds fine. Okay, we're going to continue. We're on the third line from the top on page 19a. Rabbi Yitzchak says, Kol hamasaper achrei hameis, whoever speaks negative, something derogatory about a dead after they passed away, ki'ilu masaper achrei ha'even. It's as if they are talking about a stone, which means that Rabbi Yitzchak seems to say that they don't hear anything, or it doesn't bother them, which we'll soon see. Ika da'amri, some say, Delo yadi, they don't know what you're saying, or Vika da'amri diyadi, some say they know what you said. V'layichbaslu, it doesn't bother them, it doesn't hurt them. What you say means it's insignificant to them, and therefore, if you're speaking about them after they pass away, it's to the soul in heaven, it doesn't, or to the soul wherever the soul is, it doesn't affect it. It doesn't hurt it. So the Gemara asks, Aini, is that so? Rav Papa, didn't Rav Papa say, Chad ishtoi milsa basrei demar Shmuel? Someone said something negatively about Mar Shmuel, v'nafel kanya mitlala, and a pole fell from the roof, ubaza la'anaka demeiche, and it cracked the shell around the brain. The brain. I'm not. I don't know the anatomy, but it seems like there's some type of a pouch that the brain is in. Anyone familiar with that? Anyone here?
No, but yeah, it says the membrane casing, whatever that is. Yeah.
Well, do we have any doctors amongst us? No.
Keeps the brain moist.
So there's obviously some type of a membrane around the brain. So it anyway. So this pole beam fell and it cracked that membrane. So which means that he spoke bad about Shmuel, and something bad happened to him as sort of like a punishment. So, it is a punishment. So Shani, so the Gemara says, so you see that if you say something bad against someone, obviously it hurts them. So the Gemara answers no. Shani Tzurba me Rabbanan, a rabbi, a scholar of the rabbis, the Kudsha Brichu Tava B'Ikari. Tzurba actually means a young scholar of the rabbis, that Hashem demands his honor. So in other words, not that it hurt the scholar. It didn't, when you spoke bad about him, it didn't hurt him. He doesn't see you. It doesn't bother him. But Hashem demands his honor. So that's what the Gemara is clarifying. So in other words, even if the dead know what's going on, or even according to different views that we saw, but when someone says something negative about them, it doesn't hurt them. Nevertheless, Hashem will demand their honor, and if they deserve more honor, talking about Rabbi Akiva's students not honoring each other. So this Gemara fits right in about the fact that we have to have respect, and Hashem could demand the honor of someone even if it doesn't hurt them. Robert, yes.
Yeah, there is a reference that there are 3 membranes that protect the brain and the spinal cord, and they're identified on the internet. So there are, and as Ben said, there's one that keeps the membrane of the brain moist, wet. So there is in clinical fact, yeah.
Ben, you're a master of many trades. Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi.
Medical instruments.
Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Thank you, Robert.
Invented medical instruments.
Rabbi, I was going to add something.
Yes.
Instead of viewing this person who spoke negatively about the sage and had this thing fall on his head, instead of viewing that as a punishment, a person can view it that Hashem is giving him a rectification, a way to fix his sin. His sin was he spoke negatively about the sage. And what happened? Something fell on his head, which is the idea. The sages are the brain, the head of Yisrael. So so Hashem is giving him. It looks like a punishment, like the flood, like Noah's flood. But Torah says it wasn't really a punishment. It was a cleansing. It was a rectification. It was a way of fixing his problem before he got to the world to come and had to face maybe much harsher things to happen to him. And some people have it.
So you're saying
some people.
The scholars are the brain of the world. That's a interesting point to add. Very, very interesting.
Yeah, but this person wasn't being punished by Hashem. It looks like a punishment.
It's a cleansing. Well, every punishment is a cleansing, so that's not so surprising. Every punishment is a cleansing, but you're saying it's midah keneged midah. It's measure for measure. That I think is a very nice point. Very nice, David. Right. So David's mentioning that the scholars are the brain of the world. Now there are places where it says the scholars are the eyes of the world, einei ha'eda, but we'd have to, I'm sure it must say somewhere where they're also considered the brain of the world. It definitely makes sense. But if you find that somewhere else, that the scholars are the brain of the world, then it will
Rosh B'nai Yisrael is Rebbe. So the Rosh, the head. And also the fact that the scholar, his specialty is wisdom, and something that affects the brain. It's not affecting a person's eating or their speaking. It's affecting their thinking, their seichel, their intellect.
No, logically, what you said made sense. I'm wondering if there's a source in Torah we'd have to see. They're called the Talmud Chacham from the Chacham is from the Maya, to the brain. But
so I was more emphasizing the idea of the tikkun, of the fixing of the person.
Sin is a tikkun. I think more measure for measure. That it's a tikkun it's a measure for measure. Okay.
But my point was sometimes these things can happen to a person before they pass away, and sometimes not, and then they get it in Olam Haba, in the world to come. So it's kind of a chesed, it's kind of a kindness from Hashem if a person gets a little bit of the punishment here, so that they won't face so much punishment there. You know what I mean?
Every punishment works that way. Nothing special about this Gemara. I think your point was a very nice point, but I think to connect it to this Gemara, I think it was It's about the chachamim are the mayach of the world. That's a very insight to add, and that this would be a measure for measure. Okay, Amar Rabbi Shimon Levi. Rabbi Shimon Levi says that kol hamasaper achar mitasin shel tamid chachamim, whoever speaks negative after the death of a scholar, Neufel begehenim, falls into Gehenim, into the hell. Shenemar, as it says, v'hamatim akal koloisam, and those that turn v'hamatim, those that turn akal koloisam will be crooked. Yoilicham Hashem aspoli oven, Hashem will take the doers of evil and shalom al Yisrael, and there'll be peace on Israel. So Hashem will take them to hell, it means. So first the verse says, and the Rashi brings the earlier verse. In order to understand this, you need to know the earlier verse, Rashi says, which is that Hashem does good to the people that are good. And afterwards it says, and those that are matim akal koloisam, those that are crooked and they add to their guilt, they add guilt to the, more guilt than merits. So they are matim, they tip the scale. Matim, those that move the scale, in other words, that they're more guilt than merit, more averas than mitzvahs, more sins than merits. So kalkulaisam to the side of negative, to the side of crookedness of sin. So Hashem will take them to Gehenna. So which means that Hashem does good to those that are good, but those that find negative, or those that try to find negative against the good, there Hashem will take them to Gehenna. In other words, we're translating it to mean that those that try to find negative in the righteous, those that try to tip the scale of the righteous, find negative in them, Hashem will take them to Gehenna. Okay, let's see, 11 o'clock. We're going to stop here, and I want to wish all of you a very good Shabbos, a happy LagBaomer, and
Thank you. Take care.